Good morning, everyone. I think today we need to look at the detailed content about population and also sampling and understanding also the different sampling techniques as per different methods. And also we touch on the sample size as one of the students have asked in one of their presentation in one of the contact classes about the actual sample size. So today we'll have a better understanding about how big the sample is supposed to be, okay? But I'll also explain on how to, when you write up about the size of the sampling, how to phrase the content, because sometimes they may ask why have you decided to have only 30 participants? Why have you decided to have only 100 participants? So you can justify it with a backup from literature, okay? So we'll talk about that a little bit also. So maybe without wasting any time, just maybe there are one or two who are joining us. There are most important aspects we normally share with our students. The first thing is that my name is Welcome Kupega. I am an athlete facilitator from Ekurhuleni Learning Center. So I'll be taking you through all the aspects related to research. Okay, today, like I've said, we'll be looking at the concept of population. We'll also look at the aspect of how to describe the sample size, and the sampling techniques according to the qualitative and the quantitative methods. So those are the methods we'll be looking at. So few outcomes. Okay, let's quickly understand what population is. Well, different authors, colleagues, all right? In my case, you may find that my sources are a bit old, all right? But in your case, definitely you can bring sources which have been written, or authors who have written about this description of the concept population by 2023, 24, and so on. There are latest authors, colleagues, please. We don't expect you to bring the sources which we cited somewhere in 2003 and so on. So you must always try to give recent sources, except most of the time in the issue of theory, the theoretical framework. Most of them are old, definitely. Okay, you look at the theory of Skinner, it's very old, all right? So we don't expect the latest theory around the theory of behaviorism as put by Skinner. So there are old theories and so on. The same with the theory of Vygotsky, they are a bit old, but fine. But in regards to the aspect of understanding the concept in research, we have the latest publications. Okay, so you can also use that one. But basically, if you look at Blaise, Hickson, and Smith, they describe a population, or they define population as the entire set of objects or people which is the focus of the research and about which the research wants to determine some characteristics. But when you look further, when you look at Frankel and Walton, they state that a population is a group of people the researcher would use to generalize the results of the study. So in other words, based on your study, when you want to come with generalization, so you need to look at the population. But look at the population, colleagues. It's a set of objects. In other words, population is quite big, right? So, but you need also to tell us about the population in your study. But when we look at this website, treeshorse.com, they say a research population is generally a large collection of individuals or objects that is the main focus of a scientific query. In other words, it's more about the collection or the presentation of a large collection. So in other words, your population is quite composed of big individuals. Think about Gauteng. It's an example. If you're an education student, you do your honors or your master's or your PhD, then you say to me, your population is going to compose of all the schools in Gauteng. Let's talk about the schools, not even the learners. only, or the teachers and so on. The schools, how many schools are there in Gauteng? There are quite many. How are you going to reach all those schools? But at the end, we as the readers, we want to have an idea about your population. Okay? But when you start to go and do the actual work, and you start to do your research and you collect your data, now you narrow down your population into a sample. And if you look at Gauteng, even though the population, there are many schools in Gauteng, we still have municipalities. Then we can narrow it down to municipalities. And when you narrow it down to municipalities, you can even go down and again and focus only on districts. Because remember that one of the things in regards to research, make sure that when you do research, it's less cost effective. In other words, you should not spend more money on your research, especially if you're not funded. But if the call of that intervention or that research, it comes from the Gauteng Department of Education, definitely they can ask you to touch on all the schools in Gauteng province because they'll be funding you, basically. So you don't have an excuse, okay? But if it's your own study, you can't go through all the schools in Gauteng. Whether it's quantitative, whether it's qualitative, honestly, it does not make sense. But there are two types of population, all right? We refer to them as a target population and the accessible population. Now, when we write up, colleagues, please, we don't even use these two concepts, target and accessible. No, we just say population. Okay, but definitely there are two types of population. Maybe you need to know them at your honors level. The target population is the entire group of people or objects to which the researcher wishes to generalize the study findings. Okay, that's your target. For example, primary schools learners. Right, there's something wrong there. I think yeah, but let's leave it the way it is. Primary school learners in South Africa. Okay, it's fine. In other words, you're looking at all the learners within South Africa and the space of primary schools. Okay, that's the target. But the accessible, that's the one we normally say. Other literature, they'll tell you that the accessible population is your sample and so on, but I disagree. But basically, the accessible population is the portion of the population to which the researcher has reasonable access. Can you see now? In other words, you look at all the primary schools in South Africa, but your accessible population could be maybe in Gauteng province, because you get access to those type of participants. Okay, like I've given an example there and say e.g. primary school learners in Gauteng province. But colleagues, please, this terminology, they are good to know about them, it's fine. But when you come to the writing up, especially in other levels, we don't have to think switch between the target and the accessible population. We just have to use the word, one phrase, population. Okay, that's the one we normally use. Well, there are some of the sample terminologies which we need to just take out this, which we need to understand in regards to sampling. Okay, what are those terminologies? Population, we spoke about that one. It's your total set of units. Sample, it means it is a subset. Basically, sample is a subset of the population. Okay, in other words, from the population, could be your target population or your accessible population, you take a part from that population, and that part we call it sample. All right, sometimes they use the word subset. Then you also have what you call the sample frame or sampling frame. What is a sampling frame? It's basically a list from which to select your sample. Okay? Remember that you have subset, which is your sample. Based on that sample, then you get your list. Then you call that list, you call it a sample frame. Okay? And also it's units from which you will be selecting your sample. It also completes, it's a complete list of everyone or everything you want to study. Remember, it's very important. Your sample must be a representative. The correct term which you normally use, it must be a representative of your population. As you are not going to collect data from the rest of your population, but you are going to collect data through sampling. So your sample, it must represent the population. That's why we say it must be a representative of the population. Otherwise, if your sample does not represent your population, then your study is flawed. For example, if I'm doing study in education, let's say I will focus on education, then I say, okay, my population composed of all the teachers in primary school in Gauteng province. Fine. Then when I took my sample, then I went to the mining. Then I go interview 10 participants from the mine. Definitely, it means my research or my study, it has a flaws because the sample I've used is not a representative of the population. I went out and collect data from a different characteristics, which is mining. So it means everything which I'm going to do and present in my dissertation or thesis is going to be flawed. Okay. Then also you need to understand what the sample design is. Basically, it's a method of sampling. There are two types of method designs which we normally use. We call them probability sampling and also non-probability sampling. Those are the two main ones. We'll unpack those ones, okay, in the next slides. Then we also have the parameters. Parameters are the characteristics of the population, like I've just indicated now, all right? And also you have the statistic, which are characteristics of a sample. It's almost the same like the parameters, because remember that in qualitative, your parameters are very important. The characteristics are very important. Okay, you can't just go and sample participants which have no experience or exposure to the concept you are trying to research about. So you must make sure that you get the correct people to sample in qualitative. Otherwise, if you don't do that, you end up having participants which are not going to give you the responses which you are adhering to as a researcher. And their responses, they become vague and they will add value. So we need also to be careful about that. Okay, just a simple representation in visual. I think we've spoken about this. And I think I like it the way it's been presented here. Say, out of all this population, well, you call target population, you take the sample. In this case, you can count, I think, let's say they are 30. I'm just making an example of these people, or this participant, let's say they are 30. Then from that 30, you just take 4. And the question will arise, all right? If maybe, let's give you a benefit of the doubt. Let's count how many are there. I'm not sure if it's going to work, right? Unless you get 24. Or maybe
yes,
24,
it's 24, Doctor.
Thank you. Then if I take 4 out of those 24, the question will arise. What sample technique have you used? And what informed the size of that sample? Why 4? Why not 6? Why not 7? Why not all? So all those things in your writing up, you bring them up, backing them with a form of scholarly writings, because many authors have written about this. That's why we are going to talk about the size. Okay, how we determine the size of the sample in quantitative? We spoke about that. I think what we did last time, we said we can run few tests. as you are piloting a data collection instrument, all right? You can also run a test. And that test will talk about the sample size of the study. And that test, we said, we call it the KMO test, all right? Which is the Kaiser-Meyer-Olkin of sampling adequacy. So it tells you, if I have collected data, then I said, okay, I want to check in quantitative. If my sample size is correct, then I run a test. Then the test will tell you, this test will tell you that your sample size is correct or is sufficient. So I think in quantitative, they are more covered. I don't think there will be a problem with quantitative. Okay. So what I'm trying to say that when you pilot, those who are piloting the data collection instrument, you can also ask the person who's going to do the statistic for you to run the test for you, just to check. Say, I want to check if the sample size is correct, it's enough or sufficient. All right. Then you are able to get the results. Okay. Spoken about population, let's quickly see what sampling is all about. Various authors also describe what sampling is, but I like the first part. It says sampling is a process whereby a group of individuals are selected from the entire population with the intention of representing the larger group they have been selected for. But Field describe a sample as a smaller collection of units from population used to determine truth about their population. So let's quickly look at this now before we go to the next slide. The writing up, I'm more concerned about the writing up. How to write up all this aspect in your document. Chapter 1, chapter 1, definitely. Those who are doing research proposal, definitely. You want to see all these things in your writing up. Tell us about your population. Describe it briefly. If you are writing for a master's, for your research proposal for master's, they are looking at around 400 something weights, by the way. So you can't say so much. Okay, but you need to do briefly. Tell us about the population. If quantitative, the size of your population. If it's qualitative, describe the population briefly, and the sample size. Tell us about the sample size. Whom are you going to sample the data from, and also the sample technique you're going to use. That's it. Then when you write a full-fledged research proposal, it's where you expand more. But when you come to your chapter 1 already, you need also to give a brief description of all of this, the population and the sampling, the sample size, and so on. And I always like to put it, especially when I do my chapter 1, I like it to put in a table form, where especially when I talk about the sample and the sample technique, I just put in a table form, all right? Then when you go to your chapter 3, if you're doing masters, it's going to be a chapter 3. Then from there, you expand. Yes, some of the content will be the same like the one comes from chapter 1. Okay, for example, if I have a table, if I want to put the same table in chapter 3, it's fine. But remember that if I want to describe now the concept population in chapter 3, I won't bring the same description which I gave in chapter 1. You need to describe based on different author now. You can't repeat. Okay, you can't repeat, because what I've seen with students, they have this thing, the tendency of repetition. The one I'm just doing a little bit of marking. I found out some of things are repeated again in chapter 3. They said, no, you don't work like that. You need to correct this. The only time we allow you to repeat content is, for example, when you do your findings of the results, you do the interpretation. We allow you to use the same literature which you have used in your literature chapter. We allow you that. We say you don't bring new literature. You use the same literature. Or the same literature which you have presented in your chapter 1. You use it. That's when we only allow you to have that repetition. Nomhle?
Good morning, Dr. Kupega. Trusting you are well. Good morning, colleagues. Dr. Kupega, in the slide where you were presenting the technologies, the sampling frame, I'm not very familiar with the sampling frame. You mentioned that it's a list from which to select your sample. As an example, would it be, let's say, like in my okay, let me not use an example with my study, but would it be, let's say, a list of contacts, the contacts of your population? Because there you said a complete list of everyone or everything you want to study. So just so I can maybe get a little bit of clarity, the sampling frame.
All right. Basically, what we are saying here in regards to the sampling frame, you indicate all the participants from whom you are going to collect that. For example, let's say in my case, I will say in this study, the sample is going to be collected from this participant. Maybe I will say 2 principals, 1 educator, 10 SGP members, 10 learners, and so on. That's the list you're talking about. So in other words, you indicate all the participants from whom you are going to collect the data from. Just a list. You don't even have to use the word sample frame. Basically, what you normally do, you just say the sample of the study will consist of the following, right? Especially in qualitative. You say, all right.
For example, like
graduate
study, graduate students, unemployed graduate students.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
It's just a list. It's not a methodology. Okay. It's just a list. Yes.
Okay. No. That's fine. And then the number 5, the parameters. So would that include both the inclusion and the exclusion criteria, or that maybe falls somewhere else?
Right. So regarding the parameters, what we are saying there is that if you look at the characteristics of your participant, remember that when you sample your participant, especially in qualitative, already you want to get a well-informed response. So your parameters, the characteristics of the population whom you are working with, they must be able to answer such questions. Then you say to yourself, okay, I'm in this area. For example, I want to get some, let's get this now. Let's say I want to collect from the principals, right? What characteristics I'll be looking at from these principals? If, let's say, I just want to think loud now. If, let's say, my study, it's about understanding. I just want to go back. Let's say my study is about understanding the South African education pre-1994. Okay? In other words, I'm looking at pre-1994, not post, before 1994. So if I'll say I'll collect data from the principals, which principals I'll be able to collect data from, the characteristics of those principals? Definitely those who have a knowledge or who were there before 1994. Yes. I can't go and collect data to any principal who started to be a principal after 1994, because definitely I won't get rich data from that type of a principal. So the characteristics is very important also. That's what you normally
probably
do.
Age will also play a factor.
Yes.
Because if they are much older, they would have been there, experienced the whatever issues.
Yes. I think those are that's all we want to know about the characteristics, because you need to justify. What I always say to my students, for me to say the sample composed of so many people, will ask, how did you select? Because the question is, I can't just wake up and say, okay, I've decided out of this population, I'm going to select 5. Why? What informed you? So the writing up must tell us to say, okay, you decide to select 5 of the participants because you have looked at their characteristics and also look at their the knowledge and the experience based on the study you are researching. So that writing should come up, especially it comes up when you do the report now. Remember, it only comes up when you do the report. The reporting is going to tell us. Okay, I think I've tried to give
Yes,
it.
no,
a
I get it. And then one last question, Dr. My apologies. Now,
No
in
problem.
terms of, because I'm just thinking ahead. Well, fortunately, I did receive my a clearance certificate, but I'm just, for those that are still going to go through that journey, because there is a section where they ask about the sample. So would I be correct to say with the characteristics, that's when you'll also be able to make a determination in terms of the inclusion criteria and the exclusion criteria, because it's something that is asked in that in the application form. So would I be correct by saying it emanates from the characteristics of the sample?
I'm not sure about that. No, I don't want to commit because I'm not familiar with that form.
Okay.
But what I'm trying to say is that sometimes like I've said to most of the students, is that sometimes students, when they develop their research proposal, they always think about that 400 words, especially in masters, PhD 7. Then that's why we say to them, they must write an intensive research proposal, because when you present it to the committee, they are not looking at only 400 and something page. They want to see the whole study. So, but basically, I think somewhere you need to describe your population. But what I know about the process, I think you'll correct me there. The process is that you submit. If there's a need for you to have questions and all of this, and also to expand on other aspects, they give you feedback, then you respond. So if a student gets feedback and they ask further questions based on certain sections, the students need to go and read more and also give more substantive answer around that. But I will say, honestly, the empirical evidence, the research or the scholars always try to put the scholars. And if you argue a point and you base it on a certain scholar, it's a responsibility of them, honestly, to verify. I always do that. Because sometimes students, they'll say, I've done this according to so and so. Then I'll go and verify. And I always try to verify, because sometimes if you don't verify, what's going to happen? You normally now, you put this aspect in your dissertation. Another student comes, read your dissertation, so also cite the same thing which is wrong. So we need to start to correct this thing, so that if our output is there, all the students who are using our students' output, they have the correct information. But yeah, in a nutshell, definitely, maybe that one could be discussed between the student and the feedback they get, so that, because what they normally give you a leeway. If, for example, they've asked you to elaborate on something X and something else, and you don't understand, you have a right to go and also to go and verify with them. They are human beings also, to say, I didn't understand this comment. What do you mean here? Then they give you a further expansion to say, no, we mean this and this and this, so that to give you a better response to that. Okay, I think that's how far we can go for now. Let's move a little bit. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Doctor.
No problem. Let's look at the sample size. How many is enough? Yeah. How many is enough, colleagues? It's a big question. Remember that quantitative, it's about numbers. It's about numbers. You can't generalize your results in quantitative if you have issued out only 30 questionnaires. You can't generalize. Okay? Well, it depends on the size. You remember that now. That is informed by the size of the population. If your population, you say, is 8, then state sampling, it was inclusive. In other words, you sampled everyone. Definitely, we won't argue with you. Because you can see in your writing, the population is 30, the sample is 30. Okay? But if you say to us, the population, it was 10,000, then you sampled 30. That's a problem. Already, your study or research, there's flaws. Then you can go and say, all right, let me just pilot. Let me pilot using KMO to verify the sample size. You may find that it gives you results. So your sample size was not sufficient. But qualitative, yes, we can live with qualitative, with data. I think we'll see as we go. All right. But when you look at RUSCO, as cited in Sikaran in 2013, proposed the following rules of thumb. So now, when you put the sample size, you can also cite these authors. They say the sample size larger than 30, and less than 500 are appropriate for most research. I think they are referring, maybe it's qualitative. You could also check the sample size of your study by running the SPSS. I think I've spoken about that one. Okay. In other words, they say maybe in quantitative, you are looking close to 500 at least. And please, colleagues, I've seen it. Most people, when they publish when they do quantitative studies, they always make sure that they give more sample or more numbers. It's good. Okay, it's good because we'll believe you, honestly. Okay, we'll believe you. Where samples are to be taken into sub-samples, remember now what you call that one in sample technique, you call it stratified, is it? A minimum sample size of 30 for each category is necessary. So in other words, if the stratified sample technique, maybe you have different characters or areas, at least 30. Let's say, for example, I'm working at school now. Then, as we know that our schools are divided into phases. I'm not sure if it's still the case. You have the foundation phase, the intermediate phase, and the senior phase. Then your foundation phase, I think now it starts from grade R. I need to up to grade 3, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. Then the other one 4 up to 6. Senior phase still 7. So in other words, when you do stratified, you make sure that all these phases are representative. Then you ask yourself, how many am I going to sample per phase? I always like equitable. I don't know why. I always like equitable. But sometimes equitable, it gives me a problem, especially with the last phase, the senior phase. Okay? For the other phases, foundation phase, intermediate phase, I don't have a problem with that. I can say to myself, all right, in each of the grades, I'll take maybe 10. All right? In other words, when you look at the foundation phase, it means I'll have 40 learners. Okay? When I look at the intermediate phase, then I'll have 30. Okay? Then here, you may find that you end up sampling all the learners. If the learners are 30, what I'll do, I'll sample all of them. Okay? Then I'll end up having almost 100 learners whom I've sampled. Think about this, colleagues. Okay? If I have so many learners whom I've sampled, definitely I can run a quantitative study. Yes, it's not 100, but I can still run a quantitative study around that. But there's no way I'll run a qualitative study. There's no way I'll say I'm going to interview 100 learners. Honestly, maybe if I'll say I'll interview 100 learners, but I won't do individual interviews. I'm going to do a group interviews. Then I'll say maybe I'll have 5 groups. Just make an example. Then each group will compose of 20 participants, which is too much also. Remember that when you do group interviews, you want to hear the input from all the participants. Imagine in a room where you're sitting with 20 learners. Some of them are not going to say anything. You'll find that some of them are more they are more dominating. So I always argue to say 100. For me, it's too much. But yeah, but you can justify, is it? But I've said here, NP, is this suggested rule of thumb also applicable in qualitative research? Let's quickly look at that now. All right. Here are the stages in the selection of sample. I think we just have to indicate these stages. The first one, you define the target population. You select a sampling frame. We've spoken about that one. You determine the sample techniques. You also plan the procedure for selecting sampling units. You determine the sample size, and also you select actual sampling units. Okay. Remember the following. We have 2 types of researchers here. We have a quantitative researcher and a qualitative researcher. What's the difference between the two? Your quantitative researcher, it's more concerned about numbers, statistics. But your qualitative researcher, it's more concerned about the point of saturation. To say, no, I don't mind the numbers. If I'm interviewing my participant, and I realized that in all the participants, in all the questions, I'm now getting almost the similar answers. What's the point of me going and interview the next and the next participant? Because remember that what's important in qualitative is about the perceptions, the opinion, the understanding. That's what matters. It's not about the numbers. So I'll say, definitely through my interviews, when I interviewed the 10th participant, I've already reached the point of saturation because I was getting the same response to all the questions like the other former participant. So I have to stop there. But also the quantitative researcher, they can be generalized to the population. And when we look at qualitative, we say sample size do not count. Numbers are irrelevant. What's important is the understanding of perception, views, or opinions. So in this case, the difference between the two is that the other one, more concerned about numbers, okay? The other one, it's about getting the understanding and the perceptions. Let's quickly look at the different types of sample techniques, especially in quantitative. Please, colleagues, make sure that you don't mix these sample techniques. There are sample techniques which are applicable only for quantitative, and there are sample techniques which are applicable only for qualitative. Okay, so you need to be able to get the difference. As we have indicated that there are two main sampling techniques, which call them probability sampling and the non-probability sampling. Let's quickly look at the probability sampling techniques first. I've just numbered it with A then. When you get the slide presentation, it's A, talks about probability sampling techniques. Then I also have, I think I went further. Then I've said B, the non-probability sampling techniques. So you distinguish the two. Okay, let's quickly go at the first one. Your probability sampling techniques, the different types also there. Simple random sample, You have the stratified. Let's quickly go through them again. You have the cluster. You have the systematic. Those are they fall under probability. Okay. Let's look at a simple random sampling. It's whereby participants are selected in such a way that all members of the population could have an equal representation. I've given an example there. You want to select a simple random sample of 100 learners of school A. What you do, you assign a number to every learner in the school database from 1 to 1,000, and you use a random number generator to select 100 learners or 100 numbers. I think some of these things, colleagues, we could also do them using online or technology. Okay, I've seen it when we're doing a certain raffle. People who are good in technology, they are able to set up those things online. Okay, then it just select on its own. Okay, not even manually. So yeah, technology is also there. Then you also have what you call the stratified random sampling, which I've just indicated now. I'm not going to go through that again, where I was talking about the phases. Okay. Well, you can also look at that example. I'm not sure if it's going to assist, but I think the one which I've just mentioned, it's also sufficient. I think all of us will have understood what stratified sample is all about. It's whereby, for example, like I've indicated, if I want to collect data in a school about the learners' understanding of discipline, for example, in a certain school, school A, for example, I'll make sure that I get a better understanding from all the learners. Then I can issue out a questionnaire to all the phases. Then I can decide how many learners I'm supposed to sample per phase, or I can say, okay, in all the phases, all right, grade R, I give the questionnaire to all the grade R's, grade 1, and so on and so on. So it becomes more stratified, so that all the grades become represented, or all the phases become represented. Okay. I don't think I could go through this example. You can read it on your own. I've just mentioned it with another example. We also have the cluster sampling, a technique in which clusters of participants that represent the population are stratified and included in the sample. All right. I've just used this as an example. The university has campuses in 7 provinces across the country, and all with roughly the same number of employees in similar roles. You don't have the capacity to travel to every campus to collect your data, so you use random sampling to select 3 campuses. These are your clusters. In other words, you don't select all the 7 campuses. You just, all right, from these 7 campuses, I just want a cluster, then I just select 3 campuses. Then that will be able to give me the feedback which I want. Okay? It's almost similar like stratified, but not. Okay? Then you have the systematic sampling. I think that's the most interesting one. I always like this one. It's whereby every number subject from the list of the population is selected. A method of sampling from a list of the population so that the sample is made up of every number on the list, after randomly selecting a starting point from 1 to the number. Most of the time we say in the systematic sampling, you always start with the first person or with number 1. Always. Don't forget that. Okay? Because sometimes students, they forget that. How does it work? Look at this example. Consider choosing a systematic sample of 20 members. In other words, you want to have 20 members, all right, from a population list from 1 to 836, but you want only to have 20. from this population of 836. How do you do it? You take the number, the population number, which is 836, you divide it by your proposed sampling number, which is 20. Okay? In other words, from this 836, we want to select 20. And if you take 836, you divide it by 20, you get around 41.8. Then what you do, you just round off to say, all right, 42. In other words, every 42nd member is being selected. Okay? So where do you start now? You say, randomly select a number from 1 to 42. Say 18. Remember that now, you say between 1 and 42, any number you can select. Say, I'm going to start from this number. Let's say 16 or 14. So it's going to be 14. In other words, after every member, you select the 14th person. In this case, it's 18. So you start at the person number 18 and then choose every second for the second number of the list. And this will be as follows. The first person you start with is 18. That's participant 18. Then you add, and you just say from 18, I'm going to select the next number I'm going to select, or the next participant I'm going to select should be the 42nd person. So what you do, you just say 18, you add 42, then it gives you 60. Then from 60, you add 42, gives you 102 until you reach 816. But I know that all of this now, this systematic sampling, we have technology. You can set up your laptop to select as you wish, definitely. Okay. Here I'm talking about manual. Okay. But think about this. If, for example, you want to select from 10,000 participants, and it's quantitative, by the way. So you can't do it manual. The system is there. You just have to populate the system. Okay. Maybe let's try to recap a little bit so that you don't move to the next type of sampling technique. Let's quickly look at this exercise. This is an example. It says, if I want to select a sample of 25 learners in my school, whereby the total learners enrollment is 100, how many I will sample? Okay, I think the exercise is clear. Okay.
Hi, doctor. I get 6.
Okay.
Why
Get 6?
6? Yeah, what I did 100 divided by 25 learners, and then it gave me 4, and then I chose 3 as the number 3 as my starting point. And then from number 3, I added plus 4, so it gave me 7. The next number was 11, the next one 15, the next one 19, the next one 23. So I don't know if I'm supposed to, what's the word? Progress further.
Okay.
Yeah, but
No,
that's where I am.
Fine.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So in other words, you are saying to me that you are going to sample 6 participants, but your starting point is going to be 3.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I think it's correct, honestly. Yeah, because remember that you said you take the total number. You divide by
which
the
is
anticipated number
100,
of,
and then by 25, which gave me
by
4.
25.
And then I started at the number 3. And then after number 3, then I added 4. So
Yes.
3, 7, 11, 15, 19,
Yes.
23.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I think I agree with you. Thank you for that. I think even the other colleagues, they agree. Thank you for the feedback. Let's move quickly.
Okay,
All right.
so apologies, doctor. So just to confirm, like because I'm also, so does it mean we go all the way up until the like the you know the total population, which is 100, or the systematic sample of 20 of what 25?
No,
I think I
just
get
go.
the formula. It's just that, you know, like how far does one you know go?
No, it also depends. In this case, remember, we say you want to sample 25. Okay.
Okay.
So when you reach 25, you don't have to sample further up to the 100 because you want only 25 out of 100. But if you say at the same time, when you want to go further, you say, okay, I want to sample 50. Then from there, all those intervals will be appearing also. So you say to yourself, I'll start with the third participant, then I'll go to the 7th, then I'll go to the 11th, then I'll go to the 15th, and so on and so on and so on. So you end up having those intervals in between. Others, you're not going to sample in between until you reach 50. So it's just an exercise there. For example, if I can put it this way, we just included this so that you can see that you can even go further. If you want to sample all of them.
Oh, okay.
You see now,
Okay.
then we have all these numbers which they have intervals and so on.
Okay, I
I'm
get
not
it.
sure if in this one, I'm not sure if already you're going to the last person, which 816 will be covered with this interval of 42. It can be less, okay? Because sometimes we find that the number is not tallying. Can be less, maybe 815. Then from there, we don't sample the next person because it does not fall within this limit of parameter of 42nd person.
Yes,
I'm just making an example
definitely.
there. Yeah.
Yes.
But yeah.
No.
Okay.
It makes sense. It makes sense.
All right.
Thank you, doctor. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Okay, colleagues, I think the next one we need to look at non-probability sampling. Okay. One, please, all these techniques, all of them, make note of that. All of these techniques, simple random sampling, stratified, cluster, and systematic, they are all probability sampling techniques for quantitative. So in your writing, definitely, if you talk about probability sampling techniques for quantitative, we want you guys to talk about all of this. How does it work? In your honors, definitely you need to understand all of them. In your masters, definitely you can just give all of them, but you become more specific to the one you have used. After you've described all of them, okay, maybe give them the definition, maybe the advantages and so on, then you say, in my study, I've used stratified sampling technique. But in PhD colleagues, we don't want you to tell us about all of this property sampling. You tell us about the one you have used. If it's systematic, we focus more on systematic. Okay? Let's quickly look at the non-probability sampling techniques, the convenience sampling, which we normally use most of the time, is it? As a student, when you do your research, could be your honors, your master's, your PhD, you always focus on convenience. Why? Because you don't want to spend so much time, so much money to collect data far away and so on. You want it to be less costly. So convenience always comes in now. What is convenience sampling? It's a process whereby whoever is available at a specific time is included in the sampling. All right? In other words, it's about the availability that becomes convenience. I think I've made an example of convenience sampling in one of my presentations this year, but I'll give some examples again. Let's look at this example. It says you are researching opinions about student support service in your university. So after each of your classes, you ask your fellow students to complete a survey on the topic. This is what you refer to as convenience sampling. As data have only been sampled in your class, therefore it is not a representative of all the students in your university. It's only your class, honestly. So it's more convenience. So, okay, I'm doing this research now, and this research about this and that, and I'll be having a class next week. So I'll ask my learners or my students to complete the questionnaire. Then it becomes convenience. And it's not a representative of all the university students, by the way. And sometimes I like to use convenience sampling for piloting. That's for piloting, when you pilot. But if I want to get the broader understanding of all the students about this aspect of the student support service, then I need to get permission, all of those things, and so on, and also give it to all my students. Then I can also have a parameter or parameters to say, am I focusing only on undergraduates? Am I focusing only on postgraduates? So in my writing up, definitely in my population, in my sample, I'll indicate maybe it's undergraduate. So when I dish out the questionnaire, I'll give it to all the undergraduates now. But remember that in the pilot, I just piloted it in one class. But the same results of the pilot, you can also use them to determine other aspects. You can also use them to determine if the questions which have been asked or the statements which have been asked in that question, they are reliable. I can also use it again to check even the sample size and so on. So it doesn't mean that the results of the pilot study are not usable. I can still use them. Then we also have purposive sampling. Participants are selected based on specific characteristics. We've spoken about that one. I think when I give an example about, for example, if I want to do my study in education, then I go out and do collect sample from people who are working there at the mine and so on. In other words, I've used a wrong characteristics there, such as experience or knowledge. And I think this, it's more also applicable in qualitative. I think qualitative, mostly, we are using purposive sampling technique because you want to get the experience. Your participants have been grouped according to the experience they'll be bringing, their knowledge, and so on, especially in regards to the subject matter. Okay. Example, you want to know more about the opinions and experience of first-generation students at your university, so you purposely select a number of those students. In other words, look at your characteristics there. Only the first-generation students. So you can't go and collect data from students who are not the first-generation students. As we always classify our first-generation students are those students who are the first ones in their families to come to university. Then we refer to them as first-generation students. Okay, so let's move to the next one. We have the quota sampling. It's a method in which researchers create a sample involving individuals that represent a population. All right. I think most of us are familiar about the aspect of the quota. I think it was used when you get our democracy in sporting activities. Remember, in the past, It was an issue of the quota to say all our sporting codes, they must be representative of the population of the country. So some people, they were taken because they want to have that representation. It was not about the phrase they use. It was not about the sportsman abilities or the skills and all of those things. Okay, it was not on merit. Yeah, they used the word merit. Right? It was not on merit. It was on quota. But now things have changed. Now the issue of quota is not applicable. Sportsmen have been selected on merit. Okay, so we have also the snowballing sampling. It's when you don't know the best people to study due to complexity of events. What I've just mentioned that one, I think, in one of the presentation. The issue of COVID to one of the students who have used the snowballing technique. Okay. I think it can also work now. And I like this author. It's not the author. I think I've read somewhere where one of the scholars indicate this as a chain of referral. All right. In other words, I refer you. No, I have you here. Then you refer me to the next person. Then the next person refer me to another person to another person, and so on. Then becomes more snowballing sample. Yeah. And I think this researcher, she was researching about something at Ekurhuleni. I think I could have cited also that article here. Well, I'll make sure that I cite it. Participant through informal platforms. In other words, it also allows the researcher to access participants through informal platform. It becomes more informal. But it doesn't mean that if we say it's an informal platform, you are not supposed to report about that. I think the way that student have put it in that dissertation, she also indicated on how the student was able to source the participant through snowballing. Okay. The disadvantage is that in some instances, these referrals are not successful. Because remember that I refer you to the next person, which is B. And also B refer you to C. And you find that when you go to C, whatever you want to get from C, all right, information, you will find that that information is not usable. Maybe C is not aware about the characters you are looking for. Does not have an experience or knowledge about the content. So what you need to do now, you need to make sure that you get another person who can also refer you to another person. So it's almost like, for example, it becomes more informal and there's some disadvantages there and there. But it's also applicable, especially colleagues in scenarios whereby people, they don't want to divulge information. Snowballing also works. Or in cases where we have some disasters and so on, like COVID, it has forced people to use snowballing a lot. All right. What does this example say now? You are researching experiences of homelessness in a city. Since there is no list of all homeless people in the city, probability sampling isn't possible. You meet one person who agrees to participate in the research, and she puts you in contact with other homeless people that she knows in the area. Can you see now? In other words, it's a matter of referral. This person refers you to another person. Because in this case, in this example, the argument is that there is no list of homeless people. So it's a matter of relying on referral, okay, so that you're able to collect your data. We need to look at the sampling techniques in qualitative research. Researchers in qualitative research select the sample, the participants based on some of these criteria. I think we've spoken about that one. The characteristics we've spoken about a lot, the knowledge, the experience, and the skills. So you look at those things. So you argue to ask, what informed you? How did you select this participant? Then you indicate that they were selected because of their experience, like the example we've given about the experience of the participant and so on and all of those things, and the years of the participant. So based on that, you'll be able to get more enriched data. Okay. The purposive sampling technique is mostly used in qualitative, since the participants that have been chosen could provide a specific knowledge in regards to the specific topic. I think we now understand that in qualitative, we use more purposive sampling. This is clear that no property sampling technique can be used in qualitative. In other words, there's no way you can say to us in qualitative, you have used, for example, systematic sampling, or you have used cluster, you have used simple random sampling, or stratified random sampling. There's no way. The only sampling method which is applicable to qualitative, it's probability sampling, and the technique which you can use, it's non-property sampling, and the technique which you can use there is only this one, purposive sampling. In other words, in qualitative, we are using non-property sample, and the technique which you choose is the purposive sampling. I think I'm repeating that for I don't know how many times, but it's fine. I have to repeat it. Okay, can't even use quota. You can't even use snowballing in qualitative. Let's go to the sample size now. The sample size in qualitative. In qualitative, colleagues, please. Please, what we are trying to present here, we are assisting you on how to base your argument. To say, you as the researcher, you have sampled so many participants because the author so-and-so argues that in qualitative, the reasonable number could be sampled, it's so much. Then you also include the author's details and also the page number. Then you're covered. No one will say, why did you decide to interview only 10 people or 20 people? Then support it with the scholarship. That's all what you need to do. But look at these authors. It doesn't mean that you have to cite all of them in your document. You can say, based on your study, you say, okay, I think I've sampled maybe 20 participants, or 10, or 11, let's say 11. Then you say, okay, let me look at which author agree with the number of the participants I've sampled. Then you go and say, you say Bernard. Then put the year and the page number, argues that in qualitative, you can sample between 10 and 20 participants who are knowledgeable about the content you want to research about. Then you're done. And no one will go back and say, okay, but the sample size is too small, because we have backed it with the empirical evidence. But look at Adler and Adler. They say between 12 and 60, but average age. In other words, the average should be 30. But you can still sample between 12 and 60 for qualitative. In other words, if you interview 12 people or participants, you're still on the right track, according to these guys. Then look at body. They say 12 specifically in focus groups and 30 for in-depth interviews. In other words, when you have focus group, definitely your focus group can compose of 12 participants. Then it's enough. If I have 5 or 2 focus group of 12 participants, I'm covered. Then it's going to be 12. In other words, I've sampled 24. But they say for individual interviews, all right, definitely they will say 8. Okay. Then it goes further. Creswell, our favorite colleagues, what does it say? Creswell says between 20 and 30, agreeing with the others. Informates for a grounded theory study, 4 to 5 cases per study for case studies research, and 2 or 3 for narrative research. Okay, remember, look at this now. Narrative research. In ROS scan, it could be between 2 and 3. I don't know, but think about this, colleagues. 3, honestly. So I won't go for Creswell. Okay, I can agree with Creswell here, honestly. But Ritchie et al., they suggest not more than 50 for individual interviews. Yeah, there it is. There's Ritchie. Think about 50. You're doing your master's, colleagues, then you're going to interview 50 participant individual. I think you're going to get the same answer. By the time you reach participant 20 or 30, you're getting almost the same answer. So now the point of saturation comes now. Okay? So what we are trying to present in this slide is that you also need to put the argument about the size of your sample based on some of this. I think there could be other authors, okay? There could be other authors. I'm more also interested in the writing up, and I know that I think next week we'll be working on the academic writing, so in research, so we'll also touching on the writing up. But the writing up in the research methodology chapter, okay, especially when you're doing either your research proposal or your research report, most of the time in your research proposal, you also need to indicate the population. How do you write up that part? You first describe or define this concept by various authors. Always indicate sometimes a paragraph will be sufficient. Indicate the study population. And then you have the sample and the sample techniques. You define the concept sample and the sample techniques. You describe sample as per research methodology used in the study. You provide the sample size. You describe the sample techniques used in the study. Okay? That's a writing up, honestly. And this is applicable in both quantitative and qualitative methods. Maybe let's have this exercise. We still have plenty of time. It says, based on your research topic, work on the following. I think all of us now we have our research topics. Identify the study population of your proposed study. Identify a specific sample method and procedure that you will use to select participants for your proposed study. Then explain the procedure you'll be using and the approximate size of the sample you are seeking. I think we can work on all of these 3 questions.
Oh, Dr. Cooper, maybe if it's okay, then maybe I can proceed because mine is a mixed method. So yeah, like especially on the qualitative side, I could use your input if that's okay.
Yeah, proceed because it's already 10.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. So my topic, I'm looking at the tracking and tracing of beneficiaries of the National Certificate in Pharmaceutical Sales Representative. So here the main aim is to look at their employability prospects after completing the learnership and comparing with graduates who did not participate in this type of learnership. So my study population, so these would be the learnership completers and then the university graduates. So with me, with my research, Dr. Kupega, I'm actually looking at completers between the years 2014 and 2023. So usually the learnership, it's a year-long program. So all the completers between 2014 and 2023. And then on the graduate side, roughly the same. They should have completed university, but what is important is they should not have participated in any type of learnership, or specifically this learnership. And then in terms of accessing, well, I will use social media, including the CETA consent, so that I'll be able to get access to the completers. So looking at the sampling, since I will be deploying, since I will be using my research, is a mixed method. The design, it's a sequential explanatory design. So meaning the first, I often use the term phase 1 and phase 2. So phase 1, that's the quantitative aspect. And then here I'm going to be using a stratified random sampling. So looking at the learnership, completers, and then the university graduates. So it's strata. So strata 1 would be the learnership, strata 2 would be the university completers or graduates. And then the sample size here, the intention is to calculate for purposes of sampling. But looking at, because some of the completers go as far back as 2014. We had a discussion with my supervisor, and then we opted for convenience, whoever will be available, because if I'm going to be very specific, I might end up having a very poor response. And what else am I supposed to answer here? Yes. So whilst we were going through, so it's non-probability. It's going to be convenience, specifically for the beneficiaries. And then for the graduates, the university graduates, I'm going to do a snowball. So the learnership, I'll ask them to refer. So more like each one must bring a friend or two from where they studied from, because already my learnership beneficiaries, they completed a university degree and then they jumped onto a learnership. So yeah, the main purpose there is for me to get the varsity graduates. They must bring along their fellow classmates or their former classmates through snowballing. And yeah, so that is the phase 1, which is the quantitative. And then with the
qualitative.
Yes, the qualitative part of it. I'm only going to select, but the interesting part is when I was looking at, as you were going through this morning, I'm somehow very, very attracted to the systematic. Because initially, when we were going through with my supervisor, we just said, okay, we'll just randomly select five people from each strata. So, because what is important with the mixed method, the phase 1, obviously, when we are done, we're going to analyze the data, and then we'll select 5 from each strata for and for an interview, semi-structured interview. So when we were going through, somehow the systematic sampling, speaks to me.
Okay. Now, maybe just thanks for that input. I think 80 also give you a time, then I'll go to the chat. I think it's a good writing up, honestly. I'm hoping that the writing up see the end of the tunnel, because what you are just presenting is the writing up of it. Okay. So the other thing which I like is that you are using mixed methods, and you also bringing up the sequential. All right. But
Yes.
remember that in mixed methods, and I'm hoping that you are going to read further around that, is that
Yes.
one method could inform the other method. For example, if I'm saying, okay, I'm using mixed methods, I can start collect my quantitative data, and based on the analysis and the results of my quantitative data, that can be give me a go ahead to follow up with another method, the qualitative method, where I'll design interviews and so on. In other words, it's more sequential. Okay, I think we spoke about this in one of the presentations last time, but I'm hoping in the
Yes.
writing up will see the light. Thanks for the input.
I'm going to rope you in, Doctor. I'll need your expertise. Thank you so much. But yeah, the information, Cresswell and Cresswell, they are very very informative on this aspect. Thank you.
Thank you, Mumtle. Antonia?
Yes, thank you so much. Mine is going to be a little bit haphazard because I've been taking lots of notes while you were speaking, and thank you very much. So my topic is an exploratory study on the consequences of gambling addiction and its impact on the livelihood and mental health of elderly people in Eldorado Park. And it's a quality approach.
Okay.
So I've not had feedback up until last week from my supervisor. So she's exactly given information that you've provided today. So I've got some work to do. But my research design was a grounded approach, and I'll be using interviews that will be transcribed as it is descriptive, where the participants will be observed. So the size, I was advised I can use about 15. And I think now I'm going to have to look at how I'm going to gather them, where it will be based on the experience, obviously the age group, because that is now the sub-target. And I don't know. I think I've taken so much notes from you because I wasn't sure if I must just stick to qualitative or if I must bring mixed method into it.
Okay.
So
no, I think. Can you finish?
How do you pronounce it? Purposive sample techniques, because that will be based on the experience, the years, and obviously the gambling, the activities that they partake in. I just don't know how much I get them, because obviously it's a very not everybody declares based on this addiction or the alleged addiction. So I don't know, but I do know a lot of people in the area. So it will be based on their willingness to participate. Yeah.
Okay. No, thanks for sharing. And I think you are on the right track. I don't have a problem with that, honestly. Yeah, and I also like the topic. Yeah. So yeah, on your master's, by the way, if I may ask.
Yes, the first year master's. So I have joined you a few years, last year, 2 years ago, I think, for my honors. But please, I am going to need some assistance as well while I'm doing this. If that's okay.
No. We are going to assist every student. And I just want to say to the other students, if you have any writing up of a chapter and so on, and you want us to give feedback, you just have to send it to me, or you forward it to Mr. Hloni or Mem Maile, then we'll be able to read and give feedback. If you want us to have a one-on-one consultation online on Teams like we have done, you also have to liaise with Mr. Hloni or Mrs. Maile. Then we're able to set up a session which suits both of us. Then we talk. But thanks for your input, Antonia. Let me just go to the chart quickly. I'm looking at someone have put something there. I'll start with Tabile. Yes, Tabile. Tabile, yours is quite different. Let me go to, I'll skip you for now, but I'll come back to you, Tabile, don't worry. I just want to go to KM. She says, or he says, the topic is an exploration of photogrammetry. Interesting, in crime scene reconstruction. All right. Just want to check something. SAPS forensic investigators. All right, we are going to use purposive sampling. Okay. Okay. Detectives or forensic investigators with more than 7 years of experience will be interviewed. Interesting also. Then we are also saying we'll use semi-structured interviews and you record the interviews. Okay, it's fine. Good. I don't have a problem with that, but thanks for sharing also. I think it is should be KM. Okay, let's quickly go to I think now let me respond to, is it Tabile? All right, I'll come back to you, AT. I can see your hand is up again. Let's look at Tabile. You say, good morning, doctor and colleagues. Will it be completely wrong if I am given a structure of my proposal on postgraduate? Okay, but then I also decided to include theoretical frameworks and gaps and leave out the research design. Maybe it even includes research design. I'm not sure, Tabile, but what I know is that some of the elements are not applicable in other disciplines, okay? That I don't have a problem with that. For example, if you look at law, their research proposal got different elements and so on, but others are common. But in education, honestly, we want you to also to have your research design. It must be there. And also, we want to see your research methodology. Yes, you can bring also the theoretical framework must be there, especially at your master's. We encourage our students to bring to have a theoretical framework. So if you are be given a structure, and the structure comes from your supervisor, there's nothing wrong with that, honestly. There's nothing wrong. Because what we know is that sometimes you may find that in certain departments, they always work with a certain structure for their students. But it doesn't mean that you have to limit yourself around that. And also, it doesn't mean that you are not supposed to read further. You have to read further, honestly. You can also come with your own structure. Okay? There's nothing wrong with that. But what I know, maybe subject to correction, Tabile, there is this focus area document, which most of the time it doesn't talk about the structure, but it talks about the areas on which students are supposed to focus on. For example, in College of Education, they can give you a broader theme to say, okay, the theme is artificial intelligence. I'm just thinking loud. Then you, as a student, you have to design your topic aligning to that broader theme of artificial intelligence. Because what's happening now at UNISA, and I think most institutions, they want our students to do research which is going to benefit. Okay, that's why they have the focus areas. Unlike allowing our students to do research in anything which is not going to benefit. But yeah, I think for me, there's nothing wrong with that, honestly, Tabile, if there's a defined structure. But you can also go further a little bit, okay, in your proposal, if there's a need for that. I think I'm done with the chart. Colleagues, I think we have covered most of the part of today. And I just want to check. I think what was more important for today, we need to understand the sample techniques in both quantitative and qualitative, and we agreed that in quantitative, definitely the probability sampling techniques are being used, and whereas in qualitative, we use non-probability sampling techniques, and an example of that is purposive sampling. And we also spoke more about the size of the sampling, so that you must be able to argue and present why we have chosen this number of sampling, especially in qualitative, because it's where people have more concern. But the scholars have made us to understand and also to be able to put our argument easier in that way. I'm hoping that colleagues, we now is the time to look at the writing up, especially in research now. Now, I think the next session for next week, it's going to be more about academic writing in research. In research, colleagues, I'm focusing more on research. I know that there's academic writing in languages and all of those things, but mine is more on research now. So based on the theory we have covered since the start of all of these workshops, now we're able to say, how do you write them up now? All right, in our different documents. So I think the focus will be that one for next week. And thanks, colleagues, for coming. We'll meet again next week, 8:30 up to 10:30. Thank you, and all the best with your assignment. Those who are supposed to submit their assignments in regards to their honors, those who are working on their masters and their PhD, good luck. And yeah, I'm hoping.